Connected Capital, a video series in which we look to shine a spotlight on an area of sustainability. In each episode, I'm joined by an expert in the fields of science, academia, policy, industry, or philanthropy to look at the connections between and within the human capital and natural capital worlds, and how better deployment of financial capital can help preserve, nurture, and protect our world for those to come. Today I'm joined by Dan Garlick. Dan, really nice to have you.
Thanks.
So you're motorsport director at the Goodwood Group. Motorsport plays such an important role within the portfolio of the different activities within the Goodwood and the Goodwood estate. Having looked at some of the numbers recently, I saw that the motorsport part of the portfolio is responsible for around 60% of the revenue growth that we've seen in recent years. So clearly a thriving area of the business. And it's also reflected in sell-out crowds and record attendance levels. Can you talk a little bit about your role? You've been involved in Goodwood for 12 years in the motorsports section, and also a little bit about the history of motorsports at Goodwood.
Sure. So, yeah, I'm proud to say I'm responsible as the motorsport director for the headline motorsport events. So the members meeting in April, the Goodwood Festival of Speed in the summer, a Goodwood Revival in September, and then actually we've got a new event which is Paul powered. It's a Goodwood, so all about the dog for the last couple of years. So
dogs in cars?
No, just Paul powered.
Okay.
It's the based of horsepower. But so yeah, it's a fantastic, fascinating job. And motorsport at Goodwood has been very much part of the estate for a long time. The origins really are that the motor circuit was actually an RAF airfield in World War II. It was RAF West Huntley. RAF Tangmere just up the road was a very important Battle of Britain airfield, and RAF West Huntley was a relief landing ground to it. And the pilots would rush back from their aircraft dotted out around the airfield at the end of the day, probably off to the pub. And one of those guys was a chap called Squadron Leader Tony Gaze, who was a motor racing driver as well, and suggested that the perimeter track would make a great race circuit if it was tarmacked. So it was duly tarmacked and became the Goodwood Motor Circuit from 1948 to 1966. And the current Duke is very passionate about motorsport and was determined to see it come back to Goodwood in his tenure. So in '93, to raise funds to put the necessary works in to get the motor circuit back up to standard, he came up with the idea of the Goodwood Festival of Speed. And that was based on a 1.16 mile hill climb up through Goodwood Park, past Goodwood House, which followed the route of the Lancia Car Club that used it in 1936 as a hill climb with one of the current Dukes, one of the past Dukes. So everything's sort of steeped in that history. And then, so the Festival of Speed started in '93 and put some money together so that we were able to reopen the motor circuit in 1998 at the inaugural Goodwood Revival. And it was actually opened 50 years to the day of when it was opened first time round in 1948, which is sort of a lovely story. And then roll on sort of just over 30 years. Yes, Festival of Speed is still going strong as a revival. And we've also reintroduced the Goodwood members meeting. There were 71 members meetings between 1948 and 1966. So we started with the 72nd members meeting back in 2014 and looking forward to the one coming up in a couple of months' time.
Yeah. It's amazing, that history and hearing the stories and the interactions between the Duke and his link to the sport as well. I think what's really interesting about the Goodwood estate and the Goodwood portfolio of events is the linkage around sustainability. Clearly, the estate has been around for 300 years, and the land that it's based on has been around since the dawn of time. And there's a real focus of nurturing, protecting, preserving the biodiversity, protecting the water systems, really ensuring that it's flourishing from a nature conservation perspective. But there's a clear sort of dislocation from the outside looking in between all of these amazing motorsports events, which there's a huge amount of passion behind and history, and then this idea of sustainability. And can you just talk about that perception? Is that something that you find a challenge to talk about or to overcome?
I think it's a perception that we're aware of, but yeah. I'm perfectly happy talking about it. I think the Goodwood estate, yeah, absolutely right, sort of a 300-year estate, and we're looking for the next 300 years, not the next 10 years, of how we preserve and enhance that beautiful parkland and lowland sort of farm setting for generations to come. So yeah, on the estate side of things, we take that very seriously. We've planted 41,000 trees this year, 115,000 trees in the last 3 years. And we always do that along the permissive pathways for local people to enjoy, and creating green corridors. We've got a lot of back conservation projects on the estate. So we take that side very seriously. We have a biomass boiler system that we put in, which takes off-cut wood from forestry, and also the straw bales from the fest from the speed. And that's used to power electricity for the Goodwood House and Goodwood Hotel, alongside providing hot water for both and other buildings as well.
And you even have enough sometimes to sell back to the grid, don't you?
Absolutely. So that's a fantastic project. But to enable the estate to do that, we need, being honest, we need the lifeblood of the revenue from the headline motorsport events. So it's then very important in that sort of cyclical argument that we need to be able to do the events to make the event sustainable and do good going forward. So then we just need to make our events as sustainable as possible. So we do that by working closely with partners and suppliers so that they understand our ethos of what we're trying to achieve. And then we work with British standards to audit us against ISO 2012-1, which was a sustainable management standard brought in for the London Olympics, and Goodwood was the first in the UK to gain that. So that keeps us on track. It keeps us honest to make sure that we're striving to continuously improve with everything we do.
Yeah, I think it's extremely impressive to the quality and the caliber of the work that's undertaken. It's always a science-based approach, and there's so many scientific science-based individuals that are involved in the research and the biodiversity research, and taking those ISO standards, I think, is a great step. But you go further than that. It's not just creating revenue from the motorsports part of the portfolio and then using that to fund biodiversity work and natural capital preservation. You actually look to increase the sustainable standards of the motorsports events themselves. I know that you've retarmacked using recycled plastic bottles. You're also making these very impressive and pioneering steps into using sustainable fuels. Can you talk about the genesis of the idea of using the sustainable fuels in the race last year? Yes,
absolutely. So sustainable fuel is something we've been looking at and working on for about the last 12, 18 months with race preparation teams, drivers, owners, and fuel suppliers. And we're really pleased to be working towards all races go to sustainable fuel at Revival this year. We took our first sort of dip into that at Revival last year with a grid of Porsche 911s that all ran the sustainable fuel. I'm really excited that in April, just coming up, we'll have a grid of Ford Mustangs in the Cam Miles Cup, which we're working on with LGT, which will be our next step, ready then for the end of the year and all racing be on the sustainable side.
Yeah, it's incredible to have gone from one race using sustainable fuel in 2023 to around 36 this year. Where is that energy and that vision coming from? Is it the board? Is it the Duke? Is it yourself?
I think everyone at Goodwood buys into ultimately it's a family business, and everyone needs to believe and does get on board with that core belief that Goodwood is trying to make a better place of the estate for years to come.
Yeah.
And so it's definitely a central value that everyone very much gets behind. So the sustainable fuel side is one thing, and then on the just sort of the event infrastructure side, we use biodiesel in our the generators. We worked towards that for the last 3 years, and we're now 100% biodiesel on the generator side of the events, and all sorts of things. The standard recycled cups schemes and so on and so forth. All of the things we can do, we're always looking to improve and take on board where we can.
And this idea of circularity is really clear when you're reading some of the literature that you put out. The using or recycling of the oil that's used in the hotel and in the kitchens is then refined or processed, and then part of that is being used in the boilers that you have and the generators.
Yeah, so I mean, sustainable fuel is it's an exciting topic. So generally, the fossil fuels is a finite resource. So most sustainable fuels now come from the sort of the food a segment in terms of the oils and so on, and then just converted to ethanol with that to make fuel. And it's a perfectly usable fuel. There are other ways of doing it with things like recapturing CO2, but that tends to be quite energy intensive.
Yeah.
So can be done where you've got a good source of renewable energy. But generally speaking, sustainable fuels comes from the sort of food industry side of things, as you say.
Yes, exactly. So the product or the input into the production of the fuel is a byproduct of another activity. So it's not sort of mass deforestation to grow loads of plants, which are then processed into the biofuel.
That's right. And I think where there are areas for plantations, then it's very important that people look into where their fuel is coming from.
Yes.
So there are sustainably managed plantations that have been there a long time,
Yeah.
and that's all done in a managed way.
Yeah.
Because to reduce carbon footprints overall, that's going to be a way forward.
Yeah.
The sort of red flag, the warning, is where people have got on board with that in more recent times, and it's not managed, and this is where you see the deforestation side, which is definite issue. So that traceability of fuel is all important. Otherwise, if you end up working as a sustainable fuel supplier that isn't traceable, then potentially you're perhaps doing more harm than good. So that's something that we've been doing for 4 years on our generator side, and the race fuel will be no different. It needs to be understood where that fuel's coming from.
How was the reaction by the racing community to the move towards sustainable fuels in the cars?
I think there was some nervousness to start with. Obviously, the classic cars, a lot of them are very valuable cars, but actually there's been no problems watching the race in the autumn this year. That you wouldn't know it as a commentator or a spectator, and the drivers wouldn't have known any difference. And classic cars, actually, because they're just engines, there's not the clever trickery of engine management systems you get in modern cars. Actually, whichever fuel we put in is fairly plug and play and works very well. There's perhaps some challenges over very modern cars with the engine management systems and sustainable fuels, but technology is evolving all the time, and I expect that that will continue to develop.
And are you seeing other racetracks around the UK, around the world, making similar moves?
I think we will. For me, it's not a competition. I'm really proud at Goodwood that we've kind of we've taken the lead on this because it's so core to what we believe. But I think everyone will move to sustainable fuels, and that's great. The quicker everyone does it, the better. It's not about Goodwood being first in this. It's great that we're able to talk to people and people that come and enjoy our events about it. But it's very much an industry piece that everyone needs to be doing.
Yeah.
So I think it's good that we've done it, but I think it's something that will grow in the industry.
Yeah, that's great to hear. And I know it's not just sustainable fuels and synthetic fuels. There's so much work that you do around innovation and the future of racing. Can you talk a little bit about the Future Lab, for example?
Absolutely. So we've done the sustainable fuels announcements for the classic car racing, but then equally up at Festival of Speed in the summer, we have a Festival of Speed Future Lab, and that demonstrates real cutting edge technologies to make the world a better place from all sorts of startup companies and designers and entrepreneurs. So there's a lot of alternative technology coming out of that we bring to the public eye. And then we also have a pavilion, Electric Avenue, and we bring people along, partners and any manufacturers to put their electric and alternative fuel vehicles into that pavilion, so that we can really help bring that debate and education to everyone visiting us, happen online as well, just to really spark that alternative and fuel debate going forward. So I think it's a great platform for Goodwood just to play its part in that education of alternatives. Yeah,
so and you mentioned this idea of debate. There's always this sustainable fuel pitted against electric vehicles conversation. We've spoken before about it. You needing a lot of everything. Is that where you sit on that?
I think so. Yes, yeah. I think that for me it's a little bit like, we've done sustainable fuels, but we want everyone to do it, and I think that's the same. I think there's from government down. I think at the moment the sort of solutions is probably in keeping going with all sorts of possibilities and not necessarily having to pick one particular outcome. I think there's great technology going on with sustainable fuel. Electric vehicles are coming a long way, and there's other alternatives out there. So I think it's going to end up being a blend of everything. I think as long as everyone is looking towards that carbon reduction, then I think that's all we can do.
And are there any cars that can't run on sustainable fuels? I know you've mentioned the new cars, but any older models or older vehicles?
No, we've not seen any problems from what we've done. And as I say, in the older cars especially, it would seem to be fairly plug and play. I think it's really encouraging that Formula One, for example, is moving to sustainable fuel in 2016.
Okay.
Sorry, to 2016, apologies.
2026, yeah.
So my apologies.
Okay. Time.
That I think that's really great, and I'm sure that a lot of other race series will move in that same way. So it'd be great for Festival of Speed with some of the more modern cars moving to those alternative and sustainable fuels in the future as well.
So is there going to be potentially a squeeze on the supply of enough sustainable fuel if there's massive changes happening across the industry so quickly?
That's something to think about. But I think fuel suppliers are working on that at the moment.
Yeah.
As I said, and I think this comes back to this blended solution, but it probably won't be one size fits all.
Yeah.
So I think at the moment it's proving the technologies and just making developments. And then I'm sure that will come in future. And
the organisation that you've partnered with has created a specific fuel, and the blend is completely unique to Goodwood, isn't it?
So they're working on that at the moment, yes. Yeah. So and then in terms of sustainable fuel, so the FIA, so the sort of motorsport governing body, if you like, they describe sustainable fuel as something coming from 70% of that fuel being from a sustainable source. Yeah. So that's what you see when Formula One will be moving to those fuels. It's all about that blend of fuel and just reducing the carbon footprint by those sustainable sources.
Yeah. And do you think that 70% will increase, or is that really the maximum you can do without impacting the performance of the car?
I don't think it's probably about the impact on the car. I think it's probably just a sensible blend at present as these technologies develop.
Right.
As you say, there's also the issues of sourcing and so on. So I guess that will all develop in future. But I think it's a good starting point. Yeah. And then something we'll be kept working on.
Yeah. So you obviously made a lot of pioneering changes very quickly in terms of the move towards sustainable fuel. What's next for Goodwood when it comes to motorsport sustainability?
So I think we're willing, look forward to this season and the exciting prospects of all this sustainable fuel racing going forward. And then I think probably for Goodwood the next few years is about then the Festival of Speed, really pushing those technology stories into the public eye even more so. And then as modern vehicles are able to run on alternative fuels, then you're really increasing that percentage of Festival of Speed as well. Yeah. So I think for us, that's probably will be the next focus.
It's so interesting, isn't it? This the intersection between business, the history and the legacy of the Goodwood estate, and then all of the innovation that's going on, and these changes happening so quickly.
Yes, absolutely. Goodwood is, I'd say, is a 300-year-old business, but wants to move forward to start a better future. And I think the headline events at the moment are very much the modern take on that. But it's always about striving to be different, be bold, and keep things moving forward. Be that in terms of entertainment at the events or in terms of sustainability of the events. I think that's what Goodwood's always strive to do. Just be bold and get on with it.
Yeah, and there's just such positive messages to communicate to people.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So Dan, last question. We ask everyone that comes onto this sofa to have the conversation. We're looking to increase connections and build those relationships between different spheres, different industries, etc. If you were going to recommend someone to come onto this sofa and have a conversation to increase that connection, who would you recommend?
I think probably because he's a patron of our Forest Future Lab, I would aim high and go for Tim Peake.
Okay.
He's such an inspirational person, and I can talk so much about future technologies and what's going on that side of things. We're very lucky to see him sometimes at Goodwood.
Yeah, well, Dan, please make that introduction. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.